Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. It's a auspicious moment that we've reached the end of our series, and it's probably my last time up here on the stage, so I just wanted to thank everyone for your rapt attention. All those I can see, some are in the dark, so you could be asleep, but that's okay. And yes, for the wonderful hospitality we have enjoyed. It's been absolutely amazing, and we've had to endure your accent, but that's been okay for the beautiful people that you all are. So it really has been amazing. So on behalf of Nikki and myself, we thank you for the beautiful invitation. We really have enjoyed our time here and sharing our many connections and old friends and new friends. So it really has been an absolute blessing. So thank you. So we come to our final session, Living Purposefully, and I want to try and maybe pick out a few practical things that jump out from various passages. So here we've got so far what we've learned. We're in a fellowship. We row together. That's very important about our purpose. Our fellowship, or our purpose rather, is very powerful, and it should pull us like the sun. It is like the showbread is the purpose that we should live, we should pray about all the time. Our purpose is a purpose that shines into our darkness, and it can remove us from the darkness and give us something that is transforming. Our purpose is a fruit, but it's a seed in it, and that's really important. Our purpose is lived out in a verb, in the space between the cherubim. Our purpose is an action. But our purpose is only possible if we want to be fruitful. We need to be grafted in. We need to be grafted into our Lord Jesus Christ. If we want to be fruitful, that's great because it's our purpose, but it's a purpose in season and out of season, even when it's not convenient. And that's only possible because it is the fruit of the Spirit that we are being fruitful with. And ultimately, we see Jesus and his sacrifice reminding us all the time when we participate that his life was dedicated to the fruit of the vine and to being fruitful. And then when it comes to multiplication is only possible when we have the seventh seed in us, the eighth seed in us, when we have Jesus in us, the resurrected one. When he is in us, everything changes. Multiplication is about empty nets and empty jars overflowing because we've come to Jesus and we've let him do it for us. But ultimately, multiplication is only possible if we open our hands and we give. And so today we want to come and look now at how we can live purposely. And we want to just maybe try and answer three questions. How do I develop my fruitfulness? How do I go about multiplying? And how do I live my personal purpose? And where does that fit in? So we're just going to pick a couple of lessons that possibly can help us understand this. So the first is living fruitfully. How do we create the conditions that help us to become fruitful in our lives? So we've read this passage, and we just want to consider two very short parables on fruitfulness. I'm the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. And so there are two things that we learn from this. And I think the first is particularly interesting. And that is that fruitfulness, well, let me just go back there. That is that fruitfulness is something, as we said earlier, that requires pruning. And I think someone mentioned to me, I know someone mentioned this to me yesterday, so I'll share it. This is a wonderful thing about being at a conference. People give you input and you learn and you can grow and then you can assimilate them like they're your own, and people go, wow, you know so many things. But actually everything I've learned is from others, essentially. And someone came up to me and told me about grafting and what was required, and he's obviously more or newer farmer, if you know a farmer. And apparently when you graft something, the rootstock has to be cut, and the branch that's being put into it has to be cut, and they are both then attached together. Both are making a sacrifice. The Lord Jesus was cut, and so do we have to be. It's only then that the grafting takes place, and that is what we see when we have to experience pruning. There is a cutting. In Luke 13, we read, a man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard for 3 years, I've now been coming looking for the fruits on the fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Sir, the man replied, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around and fertilize it, and if it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, well, then cut it down. So another parable on growing. It's interesting that he says, if it has no fruit, cut it off. And Dave's been talking about in his first session how we're quite good at cutting off things that look like they're not getting fruit. It is potentially possible that that may be the case, that God is the one who cuts things off. But equally, when you look at the character of God, God wants to save us to the utmost. And it's interesting that this word cut off is often translated pick up. And from what I understand, reading a little bit about farmers, sometimes what they will do is they will prop up the branches that are not bearing fruit in order to expose them more to the sun so that the potential for them to bear fruit is possible. So let's not be too quick to assume that everything will be cut off. But then there's the other part. But every branch that bears fruit, so if you are bearing fruit, you still go through the pruning process. And this is really interesting because God wants us to grow. And how are we going to grow? We need to be pruned. And I'll tell you one thing, pruning is not pleasant. It's like if you're cutting your toenails and you happen to cut too far and you prune a bit of your toe. It is not a pleasant experience. It's not pleasant when God prunes you. In South Africa, we run a little thing, and it's not only in South Africa, it's obviously spread everywhere, called Gospel Bites, and I'm going to talk about it again in a moment. But it's a very short message that we share with the intention of giving people something from the Word that's short and digestible and can make an impact on them. But there's a problem, because I write many of these, and I always have to be careful about what I write, not because I'm worried about what I write, because I know that God is going to use it for pruning me. And invariably, I'll write something, and I know Nikki's had the same experience, and it's not long thereafter that that very thing that I wrote about, God says, okay, well, let's see. Let's see how you do with that one. You know, you talked about peace in the storm in that last one. Okay, let me give you a storm and see how you apply it. And as I'm writing it, I'm going, oh, no. And I'm thinking, this is God. He's saying, he's got this message. I must share this message, but this message is as much for me as it is for anyone else. And then the little prune comes. And it's not always easy when it prunes. And then I'll even remember, I just wrote that, didn't I? Just yesterday. Wow. But that's where growth happens. Growth only happens in the pruning. And it's vital that we experience that. God's only doing it for us because he wants us to be as fruitful as is possible. But in addition to that, the man in that vineyard story was told that he had to dig it around. He had to dig the soil. And it's an allusion back to Genesis 2. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden and told him to dress it and keep it. And so what is he doing? He's told to dig and fertilize. So he's got the little fork in there and he's digging the ground and he's putting some fertilizer on it. He's upturning it. Well, digging is not a nice thing if it's happening to you. Because what's happening here? The soil is hard. It's rock solid. And in comes the fork and starts to rip it up and turn it up. Our lives can be like that. We're stamped down. Our traditions are all stamped down. And we've talked about that over this week. Everything is solid. It's firm. We like it. It's clean. And then comes the gardener fork and pokes in and starts to upturn it. You see, the nutrients, the fertilizer that's going to be put on it is only going to enter when it's upturned. And that's not a pleasant process. But that's what the gardener needs to do if the tree is going to be fruitful. That's when growth's going to happen. And so we need to look at our lives, the things we're doing, the things we're very comfortable with maybe, the things that are well stamped down, and understand that sometimes God needs to turn those over for us to get air, for us to let the fertilizer from above come into us. And again, that's not a comfortable thing. And sometimes maybe we need to consider what things in our lives are really hard and stamped down that God is going to need to overturn. And this is the fertilizer. This is probably what you could call the gardener's prayer. I pray that out of the glorious riches, out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And so ultimately, if we want to produce fruit, the fork's going to have to go in, the hard ground's going to have to be turned, and we've got to accept the love of God, His Spirit-filled love into our lives, and that's going to produce fruit. So that's key. He hurts us in a way, He prunes us, He upturns us, but then He pours His love into us, and then this tree can grow. So, here's a question. Excellent. 2 whole questions going to come in this one, and there's something else, I think. So if you haven't joined, that's terrible. But I see a whole lot of you have, so that's wonderful. So here we go. It's a little quiz question, and I think it's particularly not too difficult. So, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by something unto the glory and praise of God. Right, this is a very tricky one. Always start with a tricky one. Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by faith, works, or Jesus, unto the glory and praise of God. Right, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, and time's up. Right, okay. There we go. I'm glad so many are very good. Well done. 14. Okay, it was a trickier question than I expected. Okay, interesting. The fruits are by Jesus. It's Jesus that makes us fruitful. And that is the key. He is the one putting the fork in the soil. He is the one who is the love, the fertilizer that's coming upon the plant. It is through Jesus that this becomes possible. He is our fertilizing agent. Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, unto the glory and praise of God. These are not our fruits. They are His fruits. That's the difference. They are His fruits that change everything. As it says in Romans, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. It's only Jesus. Interesting, in that parable, it said that I've come for 3 years now and I've been looking for the fruit on this fig tree and I haven't found any. I was wondering why it's 3 years. Well, an obvious answer would probably be I'm talking about the nation of Israel. You know, I've been here for 3 years and I'm now in my, the 4th year essentially, because Jesus is going to be crucified after 3.5 years, and there's no fruit. Yes, true, it is talking about them, but it's talking, I think, about us. And there's something interesting. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Well, I hadn't. I don't know how many of you know about Orlah fruit. O-R-L-A-H. Orlah. It's a Hebrew word. And in the law in Leviticus, there's this scene which is basically out of Genesis. And it's a law that's linked to the forbidden fruit. And it occurs in the book of Leviticus. So here we'll read it together. When you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. It's forbidden. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised to you. It shall not be eaten. But in the 4th year all its fruit shall be holy, a praise to the Lord. And in the 5th year you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I am the Lord your God. So, 3 years it cannot be eaten. And so in the 4th year, it was a fruit that should be dedicated to God. And so Jesus is in the 3+1 year when He comes to the nation of Israel. And He finds nothing. He's in the year when now the fruit should be dedicated to God. And He comes in this 3+1 year and there is no fruit. But what about our lives? What does this mean for you and I? Well, the word uncircumcised fruit is quite a weird word, but it's used multiple times, specifically that word uncircumcised, and you find uncircumcised hearts, which are hearts that are not ready. In Exodus, we find uncircumcised lips, which is Moses talking about. His lips aren't ready to preach. We find uncircumcised ears, which are ears that are not ready to receive a message. So uncircumcised means it is not ripe, it is not ready to be consumed. So here you've got this fruit that is not ready to be consumed. It's not capable of doing what it should be. The key is that when plants grow, if they grow very quickly, it's a weed, normally. We are being taught something, that producing fruit takes time. We don't produce it overnight. And in fact, it almost seems like we're told it will take you at least 3 years, and on the 4th year, you're going to start to see the fruit that is possible to be used, and in the 5th year, it can start to impact others. And for some of us, we might think, okay, well, I was baptized in 1923, 3 years from that, at 1926, I'm sorted. You see, that might not have been the start for us. It probably wasn't for me. It certainly wasn't for me. There's one thing being baptized, but for some of us, we actually only understand and really get planted into Jesus much later, when we really realize what's going on and accept him into us to really make the change. And so maybe it's much later. And then he has an opportunity to start letting the fruit grow. But it still takes time. It's not an instant thing. You don't leave here and it's instantly you've got fruit. He works in our lives over a period of time. And it's interesting, second question. Let's see if any of you can answer this to do with this concept in the New Testament. Right, you've got to answer speedy if you want to get maximized here. Who in the New Testament obeyed the olive fruit 3-year law? John, Peter, Paul, Timothy. Now you're just going to randomly guess probably. But let's see if you're randomly clever. Right. And there, the time is up. And yeah, okay, you went for Paul because he must be Paul. You know, he's the guy that does everything, so it's got to be Paul. Now I should ask you for the verse. Yes, correct. Paul actually obeyed this, but do you know where? It's very interesting that Paul, obviously being a Pharisee, knowing everything about the law, knew this law. Philippians, he says, if someone else thinks for any reasons to have confidence in the flesh, I have it more, circumcised on the 8th day, and blah, 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 and he goes on and on. He talks about how he is a student of the law. He knows the law backwards. And then we read this later on. Now, this is after his conversion. He says this, I was advancing in Judaism beyond my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, he wants to multiply. My immediate response was not to consult any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were the apostles before I was, but I went to Arabia. Later I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem. Here's Paul. He has his conversion. He waits 3 years before he's going to start to dedicate his life and start to preach. Isn't that interesting? 3 years he would wait because even Paul, for everything he had received, wasn't ready to actually multiply. He had to let that fruit start to develop in him so that he could share it with those around him. And so we too have been given God's fruit. He develops it in our lives, and we need to give it space to grow so that when we share it with those around us, they can taste that fruit, the fruit of the Spirit, and the seeds from those can enter them and change their lives. And so we do need patience as God works with us. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I am the Lord your God. And here's the multiplication. Because once that fruit is developed in you, people can taste it. They can see your love and your joy and your peace and your patience and your kindness and all those fruits of the Spirit. But there's a seed inside of it. And if they take that seed into them, they too can start to experience the fruit as it is multiplied to them. This is just an interesting aside, the little calculation. I don't know how many of you have heard of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. He talks about the 10,000 hours rule. Anyone wants to become good at anything, a maestro on the piano, a good skateboarder, it takes 10,000 hours based on their research across all sorts of things. Didn't matter what it was, basically 10,000 hours. And well, that's actually interesting. If you take 365 days of the year, so this is a dedicated person, and they're going to work at something every day except one, they're going to take a break. There's always going to be a Sabbath break. So you're going to work 6 days on this thing. You're going to work an 8-hour day. You work that out, it's 2,500 hours in a year you would spend. After 4 years, 10,000 hours. In the 5th year, you're ready to go and do your thing. Well, God already knew this principle way back in Genesis. He said, 3 years, don't do anything. 4th year, dedicate it to me. Maybe an interesting principle in business. Put your time in. And isn't it interesting? How long is a degree? 4 years. 3 years often, and then a 4th year. 4-year degree. Who came up with that? Same thing, 10,000 hours. It's only after the 4 years that you're ready. So we consider this maybe for ourselves. Maybe it has something to do with even how we work in our own ecclesias and when people are ready to teach. So, living fruitfully, well, we need to reframe our lives often, make sure we are connected to the vine. We need to be prepared for the upturning, for the fork to come in. We need to be patient as the gardener works with us and develops his fruit in our lives. So the next part is multiplying. Well, how can we take this fruit now that's developing us and impact the people around us? Because that's the second part of the purpose. The purpose is intricately linked together, the fruit with the seed. As I was talking to Azaz yesterday, why do we have fruit? Why do trees have fruit? For the seed, so that more trees can grow. So the two have to go together. So how do we multiply? Well, there's this lovely miracle that we all know. I just want to read it, and then we're just going to unpack this a little bit, because here in this miracle, I think Jesus gives us the formula for multiplying. As evening approached, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Well, they're a bit shocked by that. "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves, and then he gave to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So it's the feeding of the 5,000, similar one, feeding of the 4,000. Right, so what do we learn here? And he directed the people to sit down in the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the people. In that little section, we learn everything that we need to learn about multiplying, because this is the ultimate multiplication miracle. He's taking so little, and it's feeding abundantly. It's feeding in an overflowing way. The first thing we learn is that there is a posture of teaching. Jesus sits down. He's on their level. What I'm doing here is not actually ideal. I'm up here, you down there. We often create gaps between ourselves. There is a posture of preaching where we go to the level of the people. And maybe that means I'm sitting in the coffee shop next to them, or I'm on the bus next to them, on the train next to them. There shouldn't be a hierarchy. There should be a connection. And sometimes maybe even how we dress can create a gap between us and those we're trying to reach. We need to be humble in our teaching and ready to connect. There's also a place of teaching. And I thought this is really interesting because he's teaching them outdoors. When you think about this, where we're learning now, and where Jesus is, there's one major difference. This has got walls. It's got boundaries. We confine ourselves, and it's wonderful that it's full, but we get confined. He's in an open space that has no boundaries. Now, I'm not saying you have to necessarily go outside. I'm thinking about this spiritually, metaphorically, that there should be no boundaries to when we want to multiply. We are open to doing it in all sorts of ways. We want to have this incredible place of teaching and learning that is beyond walls, and it's a place of abundance. Heard, maybe some of you might have heard of what's called the growth mindset. It's this mindset that isn't limited. We want the teaching growth mindset. It's outside of walls. It's huge. It's as big as we possibly can. Where God gives us opportunities, we look for them. And he commanded them, says the other reference in Mark, he commanded them to make them all sit down in companies. And it's interesting, that little word companies is the word garden plot. They were all in little garden plots. He wants them to be fruitful and multiply. And you can imagine he's got all these little garden plots. They're going to grow in it. And I thought, isn't that interesting? He's putting them in little garden plots. They're sitting on the grass and in a posture and in a space of learning. And they're in this place where fruitfulness and multiplication has no boundaries. And then what does he does next? taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, Jesus looks up to heaven and he gives thanks. What does he do first? Firstly, there is the horizontal, the vertical connection with his Father. That must come first. And so when we're connecting with people, when we want to multiply to them, number one, when you're in that space, whatever that space may be, we connect to God. Has to start with the vertical before we go to the horizontal. But Jesus doesn't ask God for anything. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. He doesn't say, please, Father, multiply these loaves. He says he looks up to heaven and gives thanks. And you go, wow, that's amazing. He's leaving it in God knows what to do. We like to tell God, I've got this friend here. Please, convert them now. You just say, give thanks. I'm having a coffee with this friend. Thank you, Lord. There we go. He knows what's got to happen. Jesus just gives thanks. Thank you for the bread you've given us, these 5 little loaves. Oh, that's nice. You know, I wouldn't be giving thanks. I'd be definitely asking and specifying what should happen at this point. And I think part of the problem is when we specify, it's so small compared to what God's planning. You know, we would have been saying, can you just make this stretch for these people? No, I don't want to make it just stretch for these people. They're going to be stuffed and there's going to be leftovers. And so he just gives thanks. He shows incredible faith. And then Jesus broke the loaves. He didn't give them full loaves. He didn't take the 5 loaves and just hand them out as big chunks. He broke them. There's something in breaking, isn't there? When you break something, it's a sacrifice. It's hurting in a sense, that loaf that was one. And multiplying for us is going to be a sacrifice. It's not always easy. It's going to require the breaking sometimes. It's going to require what we started with in our very first session, the exhort. Sometimes doing things that are uncomfortable. Sometimes doing things that we don't want to do. There is a cost in multiplying. And for Jesus would be his life. We might have to sacrifice our time or our energy or our resources. And so we would do those things for natural things, but will we do it when it comes to multiplying the good things to God? Because without sacrifice, there is no multiplying. So we have to break the loaves. But breaking is also to do with putting things into smaller pieces. Breaking isn't just about the sacrifice. It's because they couldn't take a big loaf and stuff the whole thing in their mouth. They're going to choke. So you break into little pieces, and then everyone can take a piece and they can eat it. They go, that was nice, and have another little piece. It's like Proverbs. A word spoken in due season, how good it is. It's a word. You know, sometimes it's just a little thing. We sometimes think we've got to convert people with big chunks. You know what? It's little by little, precept upon precept. We learn little by little. And there's something powerful in that. We may be intimidated that, hey, I don't want to try and sit down with this person and give them a 3-hour seminar. You're not required to do that. Just a word, just a small message. And it was this that really inspired us to create a thing that we call Gospel Bites. So anyone who's keen, there's the website, and we share them via WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and all those other different places. But basically all it is a short message, really short message. And the idea is, here is a short message on something. And on the website, obviously, you can go to all sorts of, you can find one on health or worry or whatever it may be. But every day it comes out. And the idea is, here is something short you can read. And at the end of it, there's always a link that says Open Bible. To whatever verses are in there, you can go to. That's where we want to get the people. God's going to do the heavy lifting on that side. We just want to give you the little taste. And so our theme is taste and see. You know, it's like when you go to these places and they give you a little taste, you go, that is not because they're trying to give away free stuff. It's because they want you to take it, that's nice. And you go and buy the big cake. Well, that's what's happening here. God is saying, taste and see. Just have a little taste. And the idea was, we wanted to break the big loaf into smaller pieces. Because a lot of people, they look at the big loaf and say, that's too much for me. And so you give them a little taste and they go, it's lovely. And so it's proved such a useful thing. And the little thing on the left, there's a card actually that I carry around, which has been an amazing thing to just give people. People aren't threatened because at the back, they always got is a blessing. I say, here's a blessing for you. And they go, I don't want a blessing. Well, you're getting a blessing, you know. There's a blessing. Most people don't mind a blessing, even if they don't believe in God. I mean, it's a blessing. It's got to be good, you know. And it's an invitation as well if they want to go and find out something more. It's not threatening. What are we trying to do? We're trying to go onto the grass, to be on their level, to share something that might be useful, to give them a little taste of a piece of bread, an invitation into the great feast. What is it about? It's about the seeds. Pass the seeds on. Let them taste your fruit. It's a blessing. And in the fruit, there's a seed. And if they take the seed, everything's going to change. And there's many ways in which we can do this. But we need you to think that sometimes we need to break things apart. And then he gave the broken bread and the disciples, and to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the people. This is really interesting. There is a channel. Jesus gives the bread to the disciples, who give the bread to the people. And just like in the miracle of the wine, somewhere along the line there, a miracle happens. Imagine, they're walking and they're like, what's this crazy? They've got like 3 little chunks of bread here, and you're just looking at the crowd and you're going, wow. I'm wondering what they were thinking when that was going on. And I don't know when the thing started to go pop, like popcorn, but somewhere along the line, they're walking and they're like, whew. Okay, here we go. There's only 3 pieces. Take one. Yep, take one. Take one. Oh, there's only 3 pieces left. Yeah, you take one. You take one. Oh, there's only 3 pieces left. You take one. And somewhere it just keeps going and going and going, and it never stops. It happens in the channel. And there's the thing. We are only the channel for God's love. We are only the channel for his fruit and for the seed. That's all we are. We're like the waiters. You know, when you go to a restaurant, you want to mess. I like doing this. Go to the restaurant, the food's really nice. Say to the waiter, oh, thank you. That was a delicious food. You are incredible. And they go, no, it wasn't me. It was the chef. You know, obviously it was a chef. But you give them praise and for a moment they might think it's them. It's not you. We just taking this gospel message, this beautiful message, and we're passing it on. That's all we asked to do. And in our hands, the miracle happens. It multiplies. Wow, that's just so incredible to be the conduit for the miracle. And they did all eat and were filled. That's a purpose that brings satisfaction. They were all filled. Everyone. So when we share God's purpose with people, they will be filled. We live in a world where there is tohu vohu, where there is void, where there is emptiness. But God is offering something that is fulfilling. And we can try and find fulfilling. I was chatting to someone during the tea break. How we try and find this in sport and all sorts of things. You won't find it there. Careers, money, fame. Look at all the famous people who got to the top of their careers and then did an overdose of drugs or whatever because they were so empty. This is filling, real filling, because it's designed by the designer of us to be exactly that. And another lesson is that the miracle is in the giving. And we've seen it over and over. It's in the open hand. Then he gave. Then the disciples gave. It is in the giving. That's where the miracle happens. We take what we've received. We've got this fruit that is growing in us. It's not for us. It's for us to impact those around us. And it's in the giving, in our open hand, that everything changes. And they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they'd all eaten, about 5,000 men besides women and children. There's always more than enough. I think it's beautiful that when we have the breaking of bread service, except maybe even this one we did here, typically, normally you have the bread and wine at the front and you share it and you come back. I don't think I've ever seen, but maybe it happens occasionally, that there isn't leftover bread and wine. And therein lies the lesson. There's not enough people in here. There's more. More should be here. There's always leftovers because God is a God of abundance. There is always more for those who would have. Give, and it'll be given to you a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. What are we doing with the overflow? And so the lessons are simple. Sit down. Sit on the grass if we want to multiply. Be in a place and a posture of multiplication and abundance. Pray. Look up. Give thanks. Have faith for what God will do in your life. Then break. Break it up. Sacrifice your time and your energy. And even your messages have to be broken up so they can be taken in by those you're sharing it with. And then give. Pass it on. Give what you've received. Become a channel become a conduit for God, and see the miracles that happen. So lastly, I just want to come and look at personal purpose. You know, what we've been looking at so far is God's purpose, and I'll put it to you, that is to be fruitful and multiply. But we all have a personal purpose, but it is subject to God's purpose. Whatever your personal calling is based on the gifts that God gives you, it must ultimately produce God's purpose. Otherwise, it'll be vain. You can be skilled at something, and people can pursue their personal purpose, but outside of God's great purpose, it'll be empty. But when it's aligned by it, it's like a sun that pulls you through every situation. And so we can have a personal purpose based on gifts. Romans 12 says just, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesy, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it's serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. Now I'm going to put it to you that these gifts apply not just to the church environment, but to every aspect in life. And I believe that every one of us receives one of these gifts from God. And we just need to understand which one it is, because then we have a wonderful focus on what our personal purpose is. And so God gives us these gifts. And it's absolutely wonderful, because there's something exciting about gifts. Because a gift is something that you didn't earn. A gift is something that you can receive. A gift is exciting. I love gifts. I had a birthday the other day. It's not too late. Still was the end of June. You can still give gifts to me. You only get that day once a year, and you get your little gifts, and it's so exciting. You know, for me, it's exciting. You know, you don't know what it is in a sense until it's, and that's part of why it's wrapped. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. You unwrap it, and inside there is this thing that's given to you. And God has given us each one of these gifts, and they actually are grace gifts, because that's what the word means. They are grace gifts. You've got these beautiful grace gifts that are given to you, and He wants you to use them. He wants you to do something wonderful. Right. So I think is this a multiple choice? You can answer something here. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to vote. If my kids were going to buy me a gift, which of these would they buy me? Tennis shoes, hiking shoes, or dress shoes? Okay. Let's see. Tennis shoes, hiking, or dress shoes, which should my children buy me? Or my family, my wife, etc. What would they buy me? Okay. Oh, that's not bad. Okay, very interesting. Okay. Hiking shoes winning. Tennis shoes, dress shoes. You're probably right. Only got one pair of scrappy shoes on here. Maybe you think he needs the dress shoes. Okay. Now, it's good that you actually know that, because you're actually correct. Because when you buy a gift for something, when you receive it, a gift actually tells you something. So if you bought me the dress shoes, I'd say, well, that's very nice, but you probably don't really know me, because I'm probably not going to wear them. Tennis shoes, yeah, maybe. I don't really play much tennis, but it would be appreciated. Sort of, I could run in them maybe. Hiking shoes, yes, definitely, because I enjoy going outdoors and hiking. So what a gift tells you is that the giver knows something about you. The giver who gives you a gift that is amazing knows you. And God, when He gives you a gift, He knows you better than anyone. So when you receive His gift in your life, know this. He's giving it to you because He designed you, He made you, He knows you. This is the best gift for you. You're not getting the dress shoes if you're a hiking shoes person. And so when we understand the personal gift He's given us, know that this is the gift for us. And He wants us to use them. So you don't put the hiking shoes into the cupboard and leave them there. He wants us to use them. And so there are what I'll put to you 7 grace gifts which are given to us. 7 of them. Which one is the one that God has given you? Prophesy. Well, you say, well, I'm not a prophet. Okay, what is prophecy? Prophecy is about seeing the future, and we can do it in anything. You could be a good manager. You can always see what's going to happen, and you try and inspire your team. You could be a parent who's a good prophet. You can see where your kids are going to go wrong, and you try and direct them in the right direction. Or you could be a friend talking to your other friend, and you can see what's going to happen here. You can see consequences. That is a gift, and it's something God has given you. Or maybe it's serving. Your gift is volunteering. You love to volunteer. You want to be the one who's making the coffee. You want to be the one who's helping family members when they've got problems. You want to be the one who's who's in the workplace even, who's trying to support people who are having a difficult time. Or maybe your gift is teaching. You love teaching in schools or universities or whatever. Or maybe you like mentoring people. Maybe you like teaching kids. You're a teacher. That's something you want to do. You want to share your knowledge. Or maybe your gift is encouraging. You like offering words of affirmation to people, to your friends. Maybe you're a counselor who likes to listen to people and sit down and have a coffee with them and talk to them. Maybe you even like to stand up in public and motivate people because you're an encourager and you want to build each other up. Or maybe you're someone who has a gift of giving. Isn't that interesting? It's a gift. To be generous is a gift. You love spending time in charities and donating. You love helping friends if they've got problems because you want to give your time and your energy. Or you're in a business and you're the one who's always looking for how your business can give back to the community. Or maybe your gift is leading. You're so good in the workplace and leading teams and setting their direction and motivating them. Or you're good in a family and setting examples and getting everyone on the right track. You're a leader. Or maybe your gift is showing mercy. Maybe you're a nurse and you like to care for people and help those who are suffering. Or maybe you're a social worker and you're helping vulnerable populations. Or maybe it's just everyday kindness, offering support to those who are in distress and listening. We each have one of these gifts. You need to receive your gift. And if you're interested, there's a little link I've got there. This is obviously not complete science, but there's a couple of questions that you can answer, and it'll give you a suggestion as to what your gift may well be. But more than that, I'll read it out if you can't see it. It says bit.ly/the7gifts. Regardless of what it is, we need to try and think about what our gift is. And if we spend time and pray to God, ask your friends, you will identify that you have been given a personal gift because God knows who you are. And let's take that gift and use it within the greater purpose that our personal purpose can really be empowered. So receive your gift. That is being fruitful. Multiply your gift. That is the beautiful part when we share it with everyone else. So receive it and multiply it. Be fruitful and multiply. That is what we are called to. So let's now bring everything to a conclusion. So what have we learned about living purposefully? Well, today we've learned that there is a fork that has to be put in if we want to be fruitful. It's not easy. We have to let the fertilizer come in. We have to relook at what we've got in our lives that might be too trampled down and too fixed in format, and accept that the Lord is going to put the fork in and He's going to upturn our soil. And the challenges of life and the pruning are what are going to help us develop that fruit. We learned that bread, it can be multiplied, but it requires us to sit down in a posture, in a place of teaching and learning. It requires us to look up and just give thanks, knowing it's all in God's power that multiplication happens. It requires us to break it up and make sacrifices and make it smaller so that those around us can receive it. And then it requires us to just pass it on and experience the miracle that happens in multiplication. And then we learned that there's a gift. Each of us is given a gift. And if we look into our hearts, and if we talk to our Lord, and we talk to those around us, we will see what it is. And if we take that gift and we wrap it in God's greater purpose, our individual purpose becomes a power that can motivate us to live our lives in the most incredible way. And so purpose changes everything. It gives us destination. It gives us direction. It changes every single thing in our lives. If I saw my dear, beautiful wife, Nikki, this will get her to cringe now, and all the speakers use their wives, and she's at the back of the hall, and I'm saying I haven't seen her for 3 minutes. Okay, for 3 weeks, and she's at the back of the hall there, and she now appears there, and you're all here, and there's chairs and whatever. I see her, I won't see you or anything. I'm just going to be over the chairs and over the thing and just straight to there. To her, nothing else matters. I don't see all the peripheral thing. I just see that. That's what purpose does. When you've got purpose, Everything else, the distractions, the obstacles, you do not see them. You just see where you want to go. Purpose gives you direction. Without purpose, you have no direction, and there's no greater purpose than a purpose aligned with God. And so that is how we want to live our lives. And so there we have it. Those are our purposes. Those are all the elements of purpose. And we can look at this and say, wow, okay, Craig, now there's far too many. There's all these little pictures. That's great. I sort of got a few of them. Well, that's wonderful because you don't have to remember all of those. Because our purpose can all be brought down to a very simple thing, which is the great commandment. They said to Jesus, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's the first and great command. But the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything hangs on this. And so the great purpose is the purpose that everything hangs on. To love God and love your neighbor. To be fruitful and to multiply. And God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom he slew and hanged on a tree. This is the law and the prophets, all come into one. This is purpose, all condensed into one. Everything. You want to know what your purpose is? Well, it all comes down to all these things. It's just one thing. It's the Lord Jesus is our purpose. He is the fruitful tree. He is the tree that multiplied through his sacrifice to everyone. That symbol is our purpose. We look to him and he's hanged on a tree. It's interesting that that's the same word hanged, that is the same word we find that the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, on these things they hang, to love God and love your neighbor. Same word, he's hanged on a tree. He is the fulfillment of purpose. And if we want to know our purpose, look to Jesus. Not a lot to remember. If you want to be fruitful and multiply, look to Jesus. He is our purpose. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And that's what Jesus was. The grain of wheat that fell into the ground, that sacrificed his life. And as a result of that, he was so fruitful and he was not alone. That's why we're all in this hall here today and across the world, because Jesus has fulfilled our purpose. And in him, we can fulfill it too. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Amen.